Okay, I think we can go ahead and get started. Welcome everybody, thanks for tuning in. My name is Addie Schlossel. I am the Stream Monitoring and AIS Coordinator at the Rock River Coalition. I want to thank you all for being here for the final afternoon of Rock River Basin content at Wisconsin Water Week. This session we're going to be hearing from two speakers. We have Kim Meyer from the Madison Metropolitan Sewerage District and Tom Steinbach from the Tall Pines Conservancy and Economo things. And they'll be speaking on the topic of adaptive management. A couple of just quick housekeeping items. This is an hour-long session that will be ending at 2:15. And we're hoping to have some time for questions at the end. So feel free to type any questions that you have into the Q&A section and upvote any questions that you would like to see answered. And I'll be keeping an eye on that throughout the presentation. You can also use the chat function to talk to other attendees or put any comments that you have out there. But if you have questions, please put those in the Q&A. And with that, I'm going to hand things over to our presenters. Thank you guys for being here.
Okay, thank you, Addie. Good afternoon to all of our attendees. Kim and I are going to be presenting various things about our adaptive management programs in the city of Madison and the city of Economo. Both of us are operating programs that have been in place for 5 to 6 years now. And if you go back to 2015, there weren't many programs even being discussed at that point. So Madison and Oconomowoc were one of the first programs approved at that time. So give you a brief intro here as to what we're going to be talking about. So our agenda is very simple today. It's going to be, first of all, why adaptive management for our communities, and then our progress so far, and then what we have learned in these last 5 or 6 years. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Kim, and she is going to start us out with the background on Madison's program.
Thank you, Tom. So the big message going into this is that it's all about compliance through collaboration. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the drivers that led to adaptive management, but ultimately it's about everybody working together for a better cause. So the two big drivers that came forward, number one was the Phosphorus rulemaking package of 2010, which put the new rules in place, the established new numeric water quality criteria for phosphorus, which impacted pretty much every wastewater treatment plant in the area, as well as MMSD, Madison. Also, the Rock River TMDL, which was approved the following year, which required all sources, not just wastewater treatment plants, but municipalities and agriculture, all to work together to reduce phosphorus and total suspended solids. Here's just a map showing in the green on the left side is the Rock River Watershed, and the orange off to the left is the Yahara Watershed. So you can see it's a fairly large watershed. A close up to the right here, this is Dane County, and the red is the boundary of the watershed. The orange in this picture is the service area for Madison Metropolitan Sewage District. So as you can see, the majority of the service area is within the Yahara Watershed, and most of it lies right around the upper 3 lakes. So it doesn't really float down towards the county line, mostly central. The watershed also goes up into the north into Columbia County, and then as well down into the south, the Rock County. So looking at the phosphorus limits, raw sewage coming into MMSD is about 6 milligrams per liter. Through biological treatment, that the effluent is reduced all the way to 0.2 to 0.4 milligrams per liter, which is a huge reduction. All that phosphorus goes to 2 sources besides the effluent. It goes to the biosolids, which is where the majority of it ends up. And then also we have an Austera system at the treatment plant, which takes struvite, which is a mineral that contains phosphorus. it removes it from the waste stream, and then a pearl is made, and that's shipped outside of the watershed. But as you can see, when we look at the rule to 0.075 milligrams per liter, that's a reduction, 70%. So a huge reduction. And that reduction comes with a very large cost, $180 million to upgrade the treatment plant to address this reduction. Now, when we look at the full watershed, the triangles are wastewater treatment plants that lie within the watershed. The green one is MMSD. So though it's located just south of the second lake, Lake Monona, the outlet, the line there in the picture is a pipe buried underground where it takes all the effluent and it takes it down to Badfish Creek. So if we asked our ratepayers to spend additional funds to meet this requirement, $180 million, they would really see no benefit in their own communities from this change. All those benefits would be sent downstream, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but if we're going to ask for a large increase in rates, it would be nice to have impact right in people's own communities. And then also looking at MMSD, when we look at the TMDL, MMSD does take up a large portion of that, 14% of the TMDL, but we have the rest of the pie here that if we have 180 million going to the plant upgrades, none of the rest of the pie would be addressed through those funds. So looking at adaptive management, there's a lot of opportunity here. There's a lot of opportunity to address the rest of this pie collectively. So a few things that we're going for MMSD when they started to look at adaptive management, the watershed has a lot of urban, but it has a lot of agriculture, and agriculture provides an opportunity to address phosphorus at a lower cost per pound. There's a lot of people that are living in the watershed. There's a lot of animals. There's a lot of phosphorus in our watershed that's required just to sustain agriculture and to sustain the population. And there's also a lot of research going on, efforts already in play. We have the University of Wisconsin-Madison right downtown with research going on in the community. We have the largest agriculture research station in the state located in the northern part of this watershed. So there's a lot of great minds thinking of a lot of ideas, studying the lakes. So there was a good base to work with as adaptive management was considered. And then looking at cost, we can do the treatment piece, obviously the more expensive option, or we can go to the left of the chart, which is pollution prevention. And really adaptive management is pollution prevention, stopping the phosphorus from getting to the water in the first place. And as you can see, it has a lower cost, and it really is the preferred option for multiple reasons. So looking at all this, in 2012, there was a pilot project started. And during that time, they did research in the northern part of the watershed. They have a farmer-led group that they worked with in the county, and they were able to identify that, yes, this is a viable option. And eventually the full scale started in 2017. So Yahara WINs is really the group that was started. It stands for Yahara Watershed Improvement Network. And this is a collection of all the players that are working together with adaptive management. There's a lot of people, as you can see on this list. All of those in white are signed on to what we call the intergovernmental agreement. So pretty much every city, village, and majority of the townships that are within the watershed signed up to the intergovernmental agreement because they all have a piece that they need to meet for the Rock River TMDL. We also have 3 wastewater treatment plants and the fish hatchery that all play into this as well. A really important piece of this is we've got 6 partners. These partners, so the ones in the white are the ones that are funding this effort, and the partners in blue are the ones that are making the changes on the landscape. So we've got Dane County, Rock County, and Columbia County land conservation offices that are working with farmers. They're doing a combination, which we'll talk about in a little bit. They're doing a combination of what we call hard and soft practices. So the soft practices would be kind of one and done, where it's like you do cover crops or you do a change for that 1 year. And then the hard practices are longer term practices like grass waterways and such. So they're really focusing on those changes. And then we have a Yahara Pride Farms. They've been part of this group since the beginning. Yahara Pride Farms, a farmer-led watershed group, and they are working with farmers throughout the watershed, and they are focusing more on the cover crops and changing rotations and how manure is applied. Now we've got two groups that are doing water quality monitoring. So we've got the Rock River Coalition and and USGS. So their information is going to be really important, especially as we move into the future, because this information is going to help verify that the changes on the landscape are creating changes in the water, which is ultimately the goal. Now we've got lots of supporters and advisors that are coming along the way. So I'm going to pass that over to Tom to talk about Oconomowoc.
Okay, thanks, Kim. All right, so the Oconomowoc Watershed Program has a lot of similarities to Madison, although the geographic area is obviously much smaller. This is again a map showing the Rock River Watershed and the location of the Oconomowoc River Watershed on the right side, on the east side of the basin. And there's only one small watershed between us and the boundary on the east side, and that's the Bark River watershed. So, like Madison's though, a good portion of the watershed, almost half of it, is agricultural lands. It's 49 miles in length from the top to bottom. Top of it starts at the village of Slinger and ends up in the town of Ixonia. The area is approximately 83,000 acres in total, 17 lakes, 3,000 animal units related to ag practices in the year 2015. And we have 8 impaired water bodies in the watershed, although the main stem of the Oconomowoc River is not considered impaired. And we flow from Washington County through Waukesha County and then into Jefferson County. So during 2013 and 14, the city was basically evaluating its options, whether to do improvements at its treatment facility or work in the watershed under an adaptive management plan. So it knew that its future limits were going to be down at 0.017 milligrams per liter in August and September. Those are going to be the most stringent months. And based on that, we were looking at our options for the 131 square mile area of the watershed versus the 6 to 7 square mile area that we were working in presently at that time. So Oconomowoc was the only treatment plant with a WPDS permit in the shed. So it was going to be down to us if we wanted to go with adaptive management or not. And the drivers for our decisions were the financial advantage, 5 million versus 15 million. Target TMDL level at the confluence seemed to be quite attainable. The benefits to the MS4 permit holders in the watershed. The fact that there was already a project in the Mason Creek area, and water quality protection for the city lakes. So the first item, dealing with dollars, you can see up at the top that it was going to cost the city in its stormwater utility and its wastewater utility approximately $15 million over the 15-year period. Versus working in the watershed, we estimate that our total cost might be around $5 million for best management practices, some additional costs at the treatment plant that we will be doing, and the stormwater improvements. But the $5 million is the gross amount before partner inputs. So the target TMDL level at the confluence with the Rock River is 0.075. That's our compliance point. And the level at 2015 was 0.09. So the amount of reduction needed was relatively small, 0.020 milligrams per liter. So we felt that that was a reasonable level to attain during this period. Benefits to MS4 permit holders. There were 5 MS4 permit holders in the watershed. reduce the burden on those by working in combination with the wastewater utility in Oconomowoc and in the watershed. And it actually would delay compliance dates for those MS4 holders. Next slide. So three of the, three tributaries in the watershed are considered impaired: Mason Creek, Flynn Creek, and Battle Creek. Mason Creek is the worst of all three of them, and it happens to be a Class 1 trout stream, one of two in the watershed. And there was already significant work being done in that watershed in 2012, 2013. So we felt that this was a big benefit to us working in the watershed, being that this work was already taking place. And this would also be where we would meet our two of our major partners in the program, Tall Pines Conservancy and North Lake Management District. The last one is water quality benefits for the city itself. Similar to what Kim described for Madison, if we would be doing improvements only at the treatment plant itself, the water quality throughout the city in Fowler Lake and Lac La Belle would not be affected, because the wastewater treatment facility is downstream of the city, downstream of these lakes. So any improvements done at the treatment facility would be appreciated by downstream landowners and not anything upstream. So all of the water quality issues that are occurring in these two lakes would be really up to the management of other communities if we didn't have any involvement. So in 2015, September 15th, we were approved for our adaptive management plan, and the OWPP, the Oconomowoc Watershed Protection Program, was born at that time. Next slide. So at this time, I'm going to move into program progress for both of us. I'll start this off for the Oconomowoc program. We've been working since 2015 to initially start our adaptive management plan proposal to DNR. So really, in effect, we've been studying the land in the watershed since late 2015. At the same time, we were working on our proposal for the adaptive management plan. The Regional Conservation Partnership Program came up through the NRCS. So we were working on both of these in parallel, and actually were awarded the RCPP program before we were awarded the adaptive management program. So in early 2015, that came about. So in order to do the proposal to DNR for our adaptive management plan, we had to show that we had support from various partners. So we have shown here some of our more major partners in the program. Tall Pines Conservancy, Rupert and Milky were one of our first two groups that came to our support, and we contracted with Rupert and Milky to do our initial adaptive management plan proposal. Tall Pines had already been working in the area doing conservation easements. So they were two natural partners to be on board right away. Next slide. Otherwise, beyond that, we have almost 30 partners in total, and I'm not going to go through this whole list, but this gives you an idea of who our partners are. And unlike Madison Met, we do not have MOUs with our partners. Basically, we're working with them cooperatively on various project situations and initiatives through the watershed. So some of these partners are more involved than others, and I'll talk about that a little bit later in the program. So a very important part of our proposal, and if you were to go into studying an adaptive management program, is to look at where your reduction possibilities will be. So we studied the watershed, did windshield surveys in late 2015. We had an excellent December to do that, very little snowfall. We worked with the counties to see what records they had, and we developed a list of 79 critical source areas throughout the watershed where we would be no doubt working to do erosion control projects. So this is just a map on the north end. The next one is the south end of the watershed. So the total of these 79 CSAs, or critical source areas, was approximately 1,800 acres. So if you look at the map here, you'll see various polygons which show all these areas that would be areas to be explored first, and look at installing best management practices. Next slide. So where are we at today? This map basically shows the watershed outlined in blue, and the green stars represent long-term best management practices that we have contracted for with landowners. The yellow stars represent seasonal cover crop areas that we have completed seasonal cover crops over the last 4 years on. The blue polygons represent stream bank restoration projects, and the blue circles represent stormwater projects that have been completed. Next slide. So this is what our best management practice long-term projects look like. Right now we have currently 44 long-term projects, and most of these are 10-year contracts with landowners, representing approximately 530 acres on those practices. And the estimated controlled acres is roughly 800 acres. So on the left side, you can see the different types of programs we have, different types of practices that are installed. And the two major ones here are pollinator cover and conservation cover. And between the two of those, we've got about 360 acres on about 23 different projects. And again, most of these are 10-year programs. So here's just an example of one project that we did last year in the spring. This was the area of the field that was receiving a lot of runoff. You can see the gullying effect on the left side. So that's been planted. This area has been offset by rent offsets that we pay the landowner so we can take this out of production. And now it's been planted in a continuous perennial cover. Another example of what we're doing is ditch repair. This is something that we discovered accidentally, but you can see that the land had been cleared right up to the ditch without any protection. So we worked with the landowner here to reestablish cover along the ditch bankment and install erosion control devices until this was established. Next slide. Big part of our program is cover crops, seasonal cover crops, and we've been using flown on helicopter seeded areas now for the last 4 years. And basically what this allows us to do is to get cover crops established prior to the harvest time, so we can actually plant cover crops within standing corn or standing beans to give them that extra time to get established and get germination going. So this graph shows that in 2017 is when we really stepped up our cover crop program, and some of that is drilled. This is also the time when our Farmers for Lake Country group was expanded and came on board with this program. And towards the end here in 2020, we're seeing more drilled acres, which is what we ultimately want to see. If farmers can manage this and get the cover crops established, we do intend to continue flying on cover crops as needed. So this is a program that's been really successful for us and has proven to be something that we feel is going to be taking off further in the future. So it's all about keeping that top layer of soil as undisturbed as possible for soil health. So that's through no-till or low-till practices, cover cropping, keeping the ground covered as much of the year as possible. Couple slide or a couple photos here showing seeding of areas for pollinator planting and prairie in a recent project along Mason Creek. We're also experimenting with what happens with those cover crops in the spring. So you go in the fall, you plant cover crops. In the spring, you have a growing crop. Now what do? Do you terminate it? So we're experimenting with crimping. So a farmer can actually plant through the crimped cover crop. Experimenting with planting green. And also in the next slide, experimenting with frost seeding. So we've actually been planting covers into frozen ground in the early part of the spring. So these are all projects that are going on with the cooperation of our farmers group, Farmers for Lake Country. So in this slide, it's just a few of our educational events that we've held. Michelle is down in the trench on the right side there on one of our soil health days. Stream bank restoration has also been part of our focus in the last couple of years. The picture on the left shows this stream that was highly eroded. You can see the bank is sloughing off, and the middle and the right photos show the repairs that have been done so far on this stream bank using riprap. Next slide. Another example of shoreline restoration. This is along North Lake. Next slide. And what that looks like when it's fully established after one season. Okay, next slide. So along Mason Creek, the tributary that I mentioned that is in the worst condition, it's the perfect candidate, if you will, for remeandering. This is a stream that's been channelized over the last 50 years or so to try to drain areas to increase cropland area. But the channelized streams are not good for fighting pollution. So we're going back in and we're actually remeandering a portion of this stream, including the riffles and the pools and the areas to protect the corners of this remeandering. So that's a project that's taking place late 2021. Stormwater projects, also a very important part of our program. This is a picture of a 1.5 acre stormwater retention pond that's been installed in the city of Oconomowoc. Serves an area of about 147 acres and is projected to remove 53 pounds of phosphorus per year. Not a huge amount of phosphorus from stormwater retention, but over the years it'll add up. Another stormwater project is our Pine Ridge Scrapes and Prairie. This is on the downstream side next to another class 1 trout stream in the system. So in this case, we've installed scrapes and prairie plantings to trap the water that's coming off the steep embankment to the west of where you see the scrapes here in red. Another stormwater project is a parking lot behind City Hall along Fowler Lake. And this was a real challenge because its elevation is so close to the elevation of the lake, there wasn't much room for any major underground stormwater treatment. So we incorporated bioretention islands into the parking lot, as well as 2 large catch basins. And this has been a great improvement for this area, not only from a stormwater standpoint, but in the next slide, we put in some features along the boardwalk to serve the people downtown during the day and then at night as well. The next slide. So it's a great feature of the downtown area, not only for stormwater treatment, but also for just the aesthetics and for serving those people downtown. Next slide. So our estimated pounds of reduction so far on an annual basis are right around 2,500 pounds. And that's not considering the controlled acres. That's just based on the BMP acreage. So using a conservative estimate of 1 pound per acre removed, we're looking at 2,500 pounds per year. And if you take the theoretical reduction of algae based on pounds of phosphorus, that comes up to be 1.265 million pounds of algae avoided per year. Monitoring is also a big part of our program and every adaptive management program. So in the monitoring program, there are several different sub-programs. Next slide. So in our program, we have our baseline monitoring, which is required by all adaptive management programs. We have our mud chasers, and then we have our Mason Creek specific program. Next slide. So this shows our baseline monitoring throughout the watershed. We have roughly 30 different points now that we sample on a monthly basis, May through October, and then we sample into the months of winter whenever these sites are open. The confluence site number 18 is our actually compliance point. Next slide. So this is a typical concentration of phosphorus throughout the watershed. Flow direction being from right to left in this case. So the headwaters is usually higher, then we come down through the lakes area, through the middle of the graph, where we get a lot of filtering through our lakes. And then towards the left side of the graph is where we start to leave the city again and go through some ag land, and then to finally the confluence point at point 18. Next slide. So on this graph, we're showing two things. We're showing our phosphorus level over the last 5 to 6 years, and then also the rainfall. And we all know that the last 5 years have been pretty severe in terms of rainfall. So how has this affected our phosphorus levels? Well, you can see that when we started the program, we were right near the red line, which is the 0.75 milligrams per liter level. In 2016, the level came up. In 17, it came up as our rainfall came up. And then in 18, it actually fell back. And 18 was the most severe year we had in terms of precipitation. In that year, we were 12 inches over our normal for the Oconomowoc treatment plant weather station. So since 2018, though, our levels have climbed again. And last year, our precipitation actually came down to less than our average. So we were down to around 32 inches for the year. Our average is at 36 inches of rainfall or precipitation total. The level continues to rise, though. So it shows that our levels in the system are very dependent on what's happening with the weather. The dotted line on the graph represents what we feel the actual concentration probably was at the end of 2020. Instead of the 0.115, we feel we were probably down around 0.090, and that's because we've got some issues at the point of confluence with the Rock River. We've got some backwater that comes up into the Oconomowoc River. And we're going to have to look at probably changing our sampling point for our last evaluation of what's going on at the confluence. Next slide. Mud Chasers is just a program involving volunteers that go out during storm events or after storm events. We actually had them go out this morning because we had a pretty good rainfall event overnight last night. Next slide. So the watershed is broken up into 8 zones where these volunteers go out to. Next slide. And through that program, we've developed several hotspots throughout the watershed that we've been focusing on. Next slide. We also do lake monitoring for different lake districts to help them determine what's going on in their lake. This happens to be Freeze Lake in the upper part of the watershed. Next slide. And then we started a newsletter in late 2019. This is a 2 to 3 year or 2 to 3 issue per year newsletter that goes out to all of our partners. and to approximately 700 different addresses throughout the watershed. Next slide. All right, over to Kim again.
Thank you. So I don't have quite as many details to share as Tom because we're kind of a level removed from a lot of these projects, but I'm going to share what our partners have been doing to improve water quality. So very briefly on the urban, a lot of the efforts are on the agriculture side just because of the cost per pound. But in the urban setting, the municipalities are doing a lot of their own work on stormwater. A big push has been moved forward on leaf collection because they found that this is one of the biggest things that we can do in communities: clean up leaves, get it out of the storm sewers, and a lot less phosphorus is going into the lakes during that fall season. So for agriculture, there's some partner highlights. This is a map. This one's in Dane County. The dots just represent the efforts that the Dane County Land Conservation Office has done towards the Yahara WINs efforts. The green dots are newer projects that they've done in 2019. Yellow ones are projects that they did previous, but they're still established. These are, it could be a grass waterway, manure storage. It's a whole list of practices that once they're put in, they provide phosphorus savings for the years to come. So that's what this map is. A really fun project that Dane County did that has had a really big impact on water quality. In this photograph, if you're from the Madison area, you've probably heard of Suck the Muck. Dane County worked to reconnect the stream back to its original meander and removed old legacy sediment. That old legacy sediment had been feeding phosphorus into the water column as the water flowed through. So the removal of that is drastically reduced the amount of phosphorus that's getting out of these streams and into lakes. So it's a pricey project, but it has great rewards that we've seen so far. Here's some pictures of some of the practices that different groups are cost sharing. On the bottom, this is strip tillage. So they pay for a per acre cost to do strip tillage. So what the farmer does is they have a separate implement that just cleans the row area, and then they're able to plant in that so that it dries up a little faster than a practice like no-till, but it still leaves a lot of residue. You can see that area where the corn stalks from the previous year are still there, even though the new crop is growing. The background picture is a grass buffer area. Groups paid for what they call harvestable buffer strips. So they pay to have an area set aside into a grass, which works as a buffer, but then that grass area can be harvested. A lot of the federal programs have habitat for animals or for wildlife, but they have a lot of restrictions on harvesting. So this allows the farmer to still use that property, keep it in production, and we can actually harvest the phosphorus that is stopped in these buffer areas. Here's some practices that the farmer-led watershed group in the area are doing. And the top left is composting. What's really great about this practice is that it encourages farmers to headland stack manure. So instead of spreading like a pen pack manure in the winter, which I saw a lot of that out in the countryside a few weeks ago when things started to warm up, people are trying to get the pens cleaned out to keep their animals healthy. This way we can stack it on the side, and either they can spread it later on in the spring, or here we've got composting, so then they can further treat it. And then this material can be either utilized by other farmers, it can be transported further, or it can be spread on a growing crop just because the nitrogen is more stable and it's not going to burn the crop. On the bottom, this is one where they planted a cover crop in the fall after corn silage. Corn silage is when they take a lot of the material, there's not a lot of residue to protect the soil, so they put a cover crop in. But then they can low disturbance inject manure the rest of the season up until the ground's frozen. So it's a really great practice, not only for PR, because you don't see or smell the manure, but it also, the growing crop keeps the phosphorus in place, it keeps the nitrogen in place. It's just a really great practice. And then in the upper right, the farmer-led group is cost sharing to hold off on spraying alfalfa until the spring, which can create a few challenges for the farmer, but it has a huge impact on water quality. In the picture you can see, this is a picture I took in the fall. The area that's sprayed, you can imagine how little residue is left by this time in the year. So by leaving that crop to stand until spring, there's a lot of residue there to help reduce soil loss and phosphorus loss in the early portion of the spring season. This one I thought was interesting. So MMSD, they apply biosolids through the Metro program. And oftentimes treatment plants don't think about the impact that that can have on a larger project like adaptive management. About, I'd say 70% of the biosolids is applied within the watershed. And typically, currently in a kind of past, we've done injection where there's a shovel and you disturb the soil quite a bit. Over the last 4 years, we've tried to find an implement that would do low disturbance, but yet still inject the biosolids. So this is a picture of an implement after multiple trials of other implements. They finally found one that works. And as you can see on the bottom, this is a bean stubble. And usually when you till up bean stubble, there's really not a lot left because the residue is really fragile. But with this implement, it's only tilling in those areas where the material is being injected. So you can see keep a lot of residue that's going to, again, protect soil and protect phosphorus over the rest of the fall and into the spring. And it also allowed the farmer to do less tillage and preparation for their crops. They could do a really simple pass. But this is something to think about if you are working with wastewater treatment plants, that there's a lot of opportunity within their own programs to make some really big improvements. So looking at the success of Yahara WINs so far, the blue is the projected P reduction over time. And in the green, we go till 2019. You can see that we've got some really good savings thanks to our partners. And we're hoping to continue to go up this hill. Those longer term practices are going to help because they're going to basically stay on the balance sheet. And then we can continue to add as we go, and then continue to cost share some of those annual practices as well. So here's a breakdown of what I call the new and the carryover. So the annual pounds, the new ones that we've created in 2019, and then the blue, these are carryover. These are projects that are more permanent. They're not just a 1 year practice. So over time, we hope that blue, the carryover, takes over more of that circle as we get towards the top of that, the phosphorus reductions. And just some challenges. It's kind of interesting to see when a lot of the phosphorus makes its way into surface waters in our watershed. Every year is a little different, but this one's a snapshot from 2018. So the winter is pretty typical. A lot of the phosphorus comes in during that snow melt. And a lot of that can be contributed to basically three things: winter manure that was spread, soil loss from soils that are exposed and you get a big melt and a lot of water movement, and then also some of the crops that are growing there in the residues, those can leach phosphorus and be part of this phosphorus loss. This one's really interesting because if you look at the July and September, you may remember in 2018 in the Madison area, we had a really big summer storm. In August, we had 14 inches of rain fall in 1 day on the west side of Madison. And so we had flooding kind of all over the area, but it was really intense in that one spot. So you can see that some of those big events can have huge impacts. So climate change is something that we need to keep an eye on and figure out how we can work around that and still make progress. So here's some in-stream monitoring information. As you can see, things are kind of a little bit all over the place in the early years, but then as we've progressed, you can see at the end how these numbers have really came together. A really notable one is the red line. This is the one, that photograph I showed earlier where they had done the Suck the Muck project and removed that legacy sediment. You can see that happened and it's just continually gone down. So that has had a huge impact, as I had mentioned earlier. But really all of the streams that we're monitoring here, they're all seeing improvement regardless of weather, because we've had a lot of rain in the last few years, 18 and 19 specifically. But we still have a long ways to go. You can see that black line is where we want to go. These are some points with the annual phosphorus load and then the annual discharge. 2019 in this photograph, or in this chart looks like it was a really big year. There was a lot of phosphorus, but there was a lot of water that went through as well. So here's a flow that's normalized. You can see that it hasn't jumped up as much as you would see in the 2019. So I'm gonna go to lessons learned, and then Tom's gonna wrap up after me. But basically, there's a few things that we can take away from the effort so far. We don't want to take forward momentum for granted. It's really important to keep the members and the partners that you're working with, to keep them engaged, and really to keep the public engaged on what the efforts are. I'm here today because thankfully Yahara WINs realized that they needed to have a full-time position to help manage the needs of the program. I started this past fall, and previously Marty Griffin and Kathy Lake had been leading the effort from the MMSD side, and they have their other jobs they're still trying to balance. So bringing me in has helped them focus on their jobs, and I'm able to really work to connect the partners and figure out a lot of the details of the program and keep things moving forward. One thing that I've recently realized is we really need to know what pounds our partners are counting. When you're working with multiple partners that are working in the same region, is there overlap in what they're counting? You know, the farmer-led groups counting nutrient management and cover crops. Well, what's the county counting? So that needs to be accounted for. You don't want to have numbers, sharing numbers that maybe aren't true. So we're working closely to make sure that everything's going as planned. And then also you want to ensure that all the partners have some sort of auditing system in place, because especially things like cover crops, depending on weather, if farmers don't get them in early enough, there may not be a lot of growth going into the fall. Also, you know, when you put in a practice that's going to last 20 years, you want to make sure that those things are being maintained to ensure that they're accomplishing what they're set out to do. And then, as I mentioned earlier, climate change. Really, the impact wasn't built into the program expectation. And we can see that there have been some really key weather events that can have a big impact on the outcome of the project. So that's something that we, like I said, we are looking at. We need to consider options to identify what the actual baseline is with climate change in mind. So Tom, I'll hand it over to you.
Okay. All right. So in Oconomowoc, there's been a lot of things learned because adaptive management was new to us. Working in watersheds was new to us. So what have we learned? We've learned that our true confluence may not be where we thought it is all the time. I mentioned this before because we've got a backwater situation with the Rock River, which seems to be affecting some of our results. A lot of volunteers come to us in our program, and volunteers are great. I will not discount them at all, but they require a little bit different management technique, patience, and understanding. We've learned that you can plant into snow or frozen ground. Nonprofits can be great event coordinators. When we partnered with Tall Pines Conservancy, for instance, they were very experienced with holding events, fundraising events especially. So when we got into our adaptive management program, of course, an education element is very important. So to have partners that were experienced in coordinating these events was really important. Project agreements with various landowners can vary greatly from project to project. There isn't one template that really fits all of these best management practice long-term contracts. Next slide. So some things that we did right. Kim talked about the fact that MMSD has brought her on as a full-time employee. We recognized up front that we would need some experts in this program. We hired Ken Dino, a former DNR biosolids expert. We hired Daryl Smith, who was experienced in landscaping and turf management. And then, as I mentioned before, Rupert Milkey to do our adaptive management proposal. We also used ERC, Eco Resource Consulting, to give us help on turf management and long-term perennial crops. Partnering with Tall Pines Conservancy, as I mentioned before, they had an experience in long-term easements in the area, so they knew a lot of the landowners already. We brought in 4 local well-known farmers at the start just to assist us to bounce some ideas off of. And that was the catalyst to form our eventual farmers group, Farmers for Lake Country. Worked with key partners to make things happen and gain financial assistance, such as Pheasants Forever, Trout Unlimited. And then we were very open and honest up front that we were not watershed people. When we went out into the agricultural community, for instance, we told them up front that they were the experts in what they were doing. We were the experts in the wastewater field. So we made that clear distinction, and we asked for their help to help us do what we needed to do under the adaptive management program. Next slide. Some things we did wrong. We assumed that all partners would be participants. Not so. Partners in our program, some have participated quite a bit, and then we have other partners that have been basically partners in name only. So that's partially our fault for not keeping them in the loop, but it's something we've learned. Assuming shoreline stabilization is a one and done deal, that's not the case. We've got shoreline projects that we've had to go back 3 times to make repairs or adjust what we've done. Picking the confluence monitoring point without vetting the details. And assume grants would be kind of an easy process. Those have gone through the grant process learn quickly that that's not always the case. So we've learned a lot. Next slide. So to wrap this whole thing up, just to talk about adaptive management in the big picture, in case you're considering this, it can be kind of a daunting process. The proposal process to DNR is no small task. The City of Oconomowoc proposal was almost 100 pages long. So you need to be prepared for that. Takes an aggressive, passionate approach. You need to really jump in and be committed to it. Takes horsepower, like we talked about, getting the right people in the right places. Willingness to accept some risk. We don't know yet if we're going to be making our confluence compliance target. That's yet to be seen. So what happens in year 15 if we're not making that confluence level? We don't know that answer yet at this point. But it can yield great rewards, just like in this picture. You know, it took some good paddling, some good time, some work to get to this point to capture a picture like this. And that's just exactly what adaptive management is about. It takes some good solid work to get there, but the rewards we're assuming are going to be great. Next slide. So it's about collaboration, as Kim said up front, working with all of our partners in a collective effort to do what's right in the watershed. So thank you for watching. And at this point, we're open for questions. So I don't know if we've got much that's come in. I'll throw it back to Addie and see what we've got.
Sure. Thanks, Tom and Kim. That was a great presentation. Yeah, we have a couple of questions in the Q&A. We have a couple minutes for those. One question that came in addressed to Tom is, edge of field monitoring indicates that we see a major portion of nutrient runoff occurs during winter/spring melt. So this person is wondering why monitoring doesn't begin in March. I think in reference to the water quality monitoring that goes on starting in April.
Sure. Well, actually, we're monitoring year-round when we can, but the actual official monitoring period within the adaptive management program is May through October. So those 6 months are the months that are used to evaluate the success or failure of the program. So at the end of the program, it's that data from May through October that's going to be used to evaluate compliance. And that's based on the DNR statutes that make up the adaptive management program.
Thank you. Someone else has asked who has taken the lead on Suck the Muck and where we can get insights on results so far. We actually had a presentation this morning about this from Kyle Minks at Dane County Land and Water, but I don't know if either of you have any details you would like to add about that initiative.
Yeah, that would definitely be the person to reach out to. They definitely took the lead on that. We're just thankful that they did it in our watershed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it sounds like a really neat project. All right. I'm not seeing any other questions coming in. But yeah, do you folks have any areas of expansion that you're expecting for your programs over the next couple of years, or any exciting projects that are coming down the line? Either?
I can say we're excited. There's another farmer-led watershed group that's formed in our watershed. So we anticipate that will be a great thing for the area. Those groups have been really great at reaching peers and having a really impact in the farm community.
I have nothing to add, Addie.
Great, then if nobody else has any other questions, I think we can go ahead and wrap this up. Thank you so much, Tom and Kim, for a great presentation. We learned a lot. You guys have some really cool programs and stuff going on there. So to give folks an idea of what's coming up next, we'll have a short 15-minute break where you can, go explore the Event Mobi world if you would like to. And then we'll be back at 2:30 with a keynote from Tia Nelson of the Outrider Foundation. And then after that, we'll have a brief Rock River regional closing session as well. I believe at 3:30. So yeah, hope to see you all there. And thank you again for joining.
Ta-da.